After that night, Marcus Webb became two different people in two different worlds. In the East Point apartment, with Brianna, he was still present. Still responsive. Slightly more distant, which she attributed to his financial stress, which she attributed with a guilt she was managing badly. She was attentive in those final days in a particular compensatory way, calling more, being warmer, cooking him elaborate meals that she brought over in containers with his name written on the tops in her handwriting. Trying, he understood, to balance an internal ledger that she knew was off. He received all of it with grace. He was not cold. He was not punishing. Because what had happened was not entirely her fault, and he was clear-eyed enough to know that. He had constructed a test. He had put her in conditions of stress and uncertainty, and then introduced into those conditions a well-resourced, charming man who was specifically pursuing her. He had done that. The outcome was not entirely his surprise. But it was still the outcome. And it still meant what it meant. In the Webb Equity Group boardroom, Marcus was a different man entirely. Devin had briefed the senior team that the sabbatical was ending. The lawyers had documents prepared. The PR team was on standby for the announcement of a new company initiative, one that would be, in its nature, a public statement of who Marcus Webb was and what he valued. He was preparing the reveal not as a punishment, because he was not that small. He was preparing it as the final honest act after a period of profound dishonesty that had been, whatever its purpose, still dishonest. He owed her the truth. He owed himself the truth. He owed them both an ending that was clear. He called Keisha 2 nights before. She answered on the first ring, which she always did. "I am going to end it," he said. "I know," she said. She had known about the test from the beginning. She was the one person whose judgment he trusted absolutely. She had thought it was extreme. She had said so. But she had also understood it in the way that only another child of the same origin could understand it. The need to know. The inability to fully believe without verification. The specific damage that abandonment leaves behind. "How are you?" she asked now. He was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window of the East Point apartment at the East Point Street, at the ordinary Tuesday night of a neighborhood that asked nothing of its residents except to keep moving. He thought about Bankhead. About the porch in the rain. About the decision he had made on that porch to build something so solid that no storm could take it. He thought about Brianna's note still folded in his wallet. "You built something once. You will build it again. Stop stressing and eat." He thought about who she was, truly the woman who gave the last pastries to the woman and child with nothing. The woman who paid her employees early. The woman who had sat with him in the East Point apartment and meant every word of her presence, right up until she didn't. Both things were real. Both things were true. She was a good woman who had made a bad choice under conditions that he had deliberately created. That did not excuse the choice. But it complicated the verdict. "I am sad," he told Keisha honestly. "I am also clear. Those two things can coexist," Keisha said. "Yeah," he said. "I know." He slept for 6 hours that night, which was more than he had slept in a week. He woke up resolved. "Tomorrow," he told Devin in the morning, "we do it." The final test was not part of the original plan. It was something Marcus added in the last 48 hours, driven by a complicated impulse that he would not fully understand until after it was over. He called Brianna at 11 in the morning on a Thursday and told her that things had gotten worse. The second lawsuit had produced a judgment. He was going to have to vacate the East Point apartment. He had no plan yet. He was figuring it out. There was a silence on the phone that lasted exactly 4 seconds. He counted. Then Brianna said, "Marcus, I have to be honest with you." He waited. The silence was different this time. Heavier. The kind of silence where a person is selecting words from a pile, trying to find the ones that will do the work without causing the damage. "I care about you deeply," she said. "You know that. But I am going through a really critical time with the bakery and I am I am not sure that I am in a place where I can be a support system for someone who is also dealing with major instability. I do not want to be the reason you fall further. And I do not want to set myself back. He had expected some version of this. He had expected it for 2 weeks. But expectation does not fully prepare you for the reality of a thing. The words landed anyway. "What are you saying?" he said. His voice was calm. He needed it to stay calm. "I think maybe we should take some space," she said carefully. "I am not saying it is over. I am just saying right now I need to focus on myself and my business. Maybe when things stabilize for you, we can revisit." He closed his eyes. He sat very still in the East Point apartment kitchen, his hand flat on the table, breathing. Outside, a garbage truck went by. The refrigerator hummed. The world kept it small, indifferent noise. "Okay," he said. "I understand. It is okay, Brianna. I hear you. Take care of yourself." He hung up. Devin called 30 seconds later. Marcus let it ring twice, then answered. "She ended it," Marcus said. Devin's voice was quiet. "I am sorry." "Don't be," Marcus said. He stood up. He straightened his posture, the way he had taught himself to do at 11 years old on a porch in the rain, when the world required him to stand before it was safe to sit down. "Let us do this. Tonight." The event that Devin arranged was specific in its elegance. Not a dinner party, this was not a private humiliation. Not a public press conference, this was not a spectacle. It was, of all things, a ribbon cutting. 6 months earlier, before the disguise, before Club Onyx, before any of it, Marcus had quietly purchased a commercial property on Auburn Avenue. A building that had sat vacant for 3 years, which the neighborhood had been waiting on someone to revive. He had been planning a community development project, a hub that would house small Black-owned businesses, offer subsidized commercial kitchen space to food entrepreneurs, and provide mentorship infrastructure for people who were trying to build what he had built from nothing. He had been planning to name it after his mother, because whatever she had done, and whatever she had become, she had given him something before she left, a name that meant warrior in a language he did not speak but carried in his blood. The Sandra Webb Community Business Center. The ribbon cutting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon on Auburn Avenue, 3 blocks from Sweet Brown Sugar Bakery. The guest list included the mayor's office, the city council member for the district, several community business leaders, and a carefully selected press contingent. Devin had arranged for an invitation to be delivered to Sweet Brown Sugar that morning, a formal, printed invitation addressed to Brianna Cole, inviting her as a neighboring business owner to attend the opening of a new community resource that might benefit her and her employees. She would not know who had built it until she arrived. Marcus spent the morning of the event in the Webb Equity Group boardroom, in a suit that fit him the way only clothing made specifically for a body fits. Dark charcoal. Crisp white shirt. No tie. He had never been a tie person, and he was not going to become one for a revelation. Devin had pressed his shoes himself, which Marcus told him was unnecessary, and which Devin did anyway, because Devin expressed care through action. Keisha arrived at 11. She straightened his lapel without being asked, the way she had always straightened the things that were crooked around her brother. She did not say anything. She did not need to. He looked at himself in the glass of the boardroom window, the city spreading behind him. He did not look like a man from Bankhead. He did not look like the man who had spent 3 months in a studio apartment in East Point. He looked like Marcus Webb, which was not a costume and not a performance. It was the truth. At 2 in the afternoon, he left the boardroom and rode the elevator down and walked out into the Atlanta afternoon sunlight. Auburn Avenue was dressed up for it. The building had been transformed, fresh exterior, large windows, a landscaped entrance with a hand-lettered wooden sign, the Sandra Webb Community Business Center. A crowd had gathered, the kind of organic Atlanta crowd that assembled when something felt real, neighbors, business owners, community members who had watched that building sit empty and had come to see it become something. Television cameras from 2 local stations were set up on the perimeter. Devin stood near the entrance in his best suit, the one he called his serious business suit, managing the logistics with the smooth efficiency of a man who had spent 4 years making impossibilities possible for Marcus Webb. Marcus arrived, and the crowd responded the way crowds respond to the arrival of the person whose name is on the building. A hum, a shift, an orientation of bodies toward him. He shook hands, spoke to the mayor's representative, accepted a child's drawing of a building that someone's daughter had made overnight after hearing about the event. He held the drawing with the same care he gave to anything that mattered. He did not look toward sweet brown sugar. He did not allow himself to do that. At 3:15, he saw Devin's slight nod from the entrance, which meant she was here. He kept his attention on the ceremony. The mayor's representative spoke. The community council member spoke. Devin handed Marcus the scissors for the ribbon, a wide gold ribbon stretched across the building's entrance. The crowd pressed in. Cameras clicked. This moment would be in the paper tomorrow. It would be on the 6 o'clock news tonight. He cut the ribbon. The crowd applauded. The doors of the Sandra Webb Community Business Center opened for the first time. And then Marcus turned. She was standing at the back of the crowd, still in her bakery apron, her braids back in the messy bun, her hands together in front of her. She had come quickly, perhaps walking the 3 blocks from sweet brown sugar without stopping to change, which meant the invitation had moved her in a way she had not expected. Her eyes were on the building. He watched her read the name on the sign. He watched the name travel from her eyes into her understanding. And then she looked for the person who had built it. And she found him, 30 feet away, in a charcoal suit. The same face she had looked at for 4 months. The same eyes, calm, alert, paying attention. Not Marcus in a hoodie with scuffed sneakers. Marcus Webb. He watched her face go through 7 distinct things in about 4 seconds. Recognition. Confusion. The first edge of understanding. Disbelief. Understanding completing itself. Something that might have been wonder if it had been allowed to develop. And then, moving quickly behind all of it like a storm behind a clear sky, the beginning of the reckoning. He held her gaze. He walked toward her. The crowd existed only as background. Everything else was the 20 feet between them and the truth that was finally about to exist in full daylight. He stopped 3 feet away. He said, in the same unhurried, calm voice he always had, "Hello, Brianna." She stared at him. "I do not understand," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know." She looked at the building, at the sign, then back at him. The suit. The way Devin was standing near him with the practiced deference of a senior assistant. The cameras. The crowd that knew his name. "You are Marcus Webb." "Yes." She shook her head slightly, as if trying to rearrange furniture in a room that had unexpectedly expanded. This whole time you were, and you let me think." "Yes," he said. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her since the first day on Edgewood Avenue, with the full, clear attention of a man who did not have anything left to hide. "Because I needed to know who you were when I had nothing. I have been burned before by people who saw the money first and the man second. I needed to know which one you saw." She closed her eyes briefly. "And what did you decide?" He thought about the East Point apartment. About the note in his wallet. About the woman who had given the last pastries away and gone in the back and said nothing. About Club Onyx and the gold dress and the hand she had not pulled away from another man's grip. "I decided," he said carefully, "that you are a good woman who made a hard choice when things got difficult." He paused. "And I decided that I could not spend my life with someone who needed things to be easy in order to stay." Brianna's eyes filled. Not the performed tears of a woman managing a situation. The real ones that come from a place deeper than strategy. "I did not choose him," she said. "I never chose him. I was scared." "I know you were scared," he said. "I know." I am not angry at you for being scared. He looked at her steadily. But you told me to take space when you thought I had nothing. And Brianna, I built this. He gestured at the building, at the street, at the city behind him from nothing. From actual nothing. And I needed the person next to me to be someone who would have stayed through the nothing. She was crying now, quietly, the tears running without drama. The crowd had given them space, either by Devon's direction or by the simple human recognition that something real was happening in front of them. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. He had put it there that morning. Not because he had decided to give it to her, he had not decided that, not for certain, not even now. But because he needed to hold both possibilities until the moment revealed which one was true. It was a ring. Simple, elegant, designed by a jeweler in Marietta who had spent 45 minutes with Marcus learning about a woman he had never met, and then built something that was entirely and specifically her. A ring he had bought 6 weeks ago, before Club Onyx, before the final test, before the phone call where she had asked for space. He held it in his open palm. He did not open the box. He just held it. I was going to ask you to marry me, he said. The day before I started this test, I bought this. Because I was sure. He looked at it for a moment. I am not sure anymore. And I am not going to pretend to be sure for the sake of a scene. She looked at the ring. A sound came out of her that was not quite a word. What I am sure of, he said, is that you deserve honesty. Which I have not given you entirely in the last 3 months. That is on me. I put you in conditions designed to test you, and that was not fair, and I have spent a long time sitting with the fact that it was not fair. He looked at her face. Despite everything, she was one of the most extraordinary people he had ever known. That had not changed. That was the thing that made all of this so painful and so complicated. But honest, he said. That is who I need to be, even when it costs me. He closed his fingers around the ring box. So I am going to give you some time, and I am going to give myself some time, and I am going to try to figure out if what we had was enough to be worth another conversation. He looked at her one long final moment. And Brianna, one more thing. The bakery, he said. The commercial kitchen space on the second floor of this building, I set it aside 8 months ago as a potential expansion space for sweet brown sugar, if you ever wanted to grow a wholesale division. No strings. No conditions. It is yours if you want it, regardless of what happens between us. Because what you built on Auburn Avenue is real, and it deserves to grow, and I was never going to let my personal feelings determine whether a good business got the resources it needed. He stepped back. He turned. He walked toward the building that bore his mother's name, and the crowd, which had been holding its collective breath, released it in a long, complicated exhale. The story was on the news that evening. Not the personal part. Marcus had been clear with Devon that the personal part was not for broadcast. But Marcus Webb himself, back in public, launching a community development project on Auburn Avenue, worth $437 million and apparently returning from a sabbatical that had clearly involved a significant personal journey. That was news, and Atlanta media had enough pieces to construct a compelling story without the private ones. Darius Langston saw it at 7:15 from his Buckhead condo. He watched Marcus Webb cut a ribbon in a charcoal suit on the 6 o'clock news, read the churn that said Webb Equity Group's CEO returns with major community investment, and understood, with the clean and immediate clarity of a man who dealt in value assessments, exactly what had happened. He had been used as a prop. Not intentionally, no one had told Brianna to interact with him in order to test Marcus's reaction. But the geometry of it was undeniable. He had been the variable in someone else's equation. He was not accustomed to being the variable. He was accustomed to being the constant. He did not call Brianna. He made a note to have his assistant redirect the community development partnership inquiries to a different contact. He poured 2 fingers of scotch and watched the rest of the news with the particular expression of a man who had arrived second to a race he had not known he was in. Chanel saw it at 7:30, also on the news, and sat very still on her couch for a full minute. Then she called Brianna. Brianna did not answer. She was sitting in the bakery, which she had re-entered after the ribbon cutting and not left since, sitting on the floor with her back against the display case in the closed shop, the lights dimmed, her apron still on. She was not crying anymore. She had moved past crying into the particular stillness that exists on the other side of it, the flat, silent territory where a person has to decide who they are going to be from now on. She thought about everything. She thought about it with the uncommon honesty of a person who has had all the comfortable justifications stripped away. She thought about how she had felt when Marcus helped her carry the mixer. She thought about the corner table on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She thought about the Sunday brunch with Keisha and what Keisha had said quietly across the table. She thought about the note she had left in his cabinet in East Point. You built something once. You will build it again. Stop stressing and eat. She thought about what that note had meant when she wrote it, and what it meant now that she knew who she had written it to. She thought about Club Onyx. She thought about the gold dress and Darius's hand and the 20 minutes on the rooftop in Midtown, and she sat with all of it without defense because defense required comfort she no longer had. She had not lied to Marcus, but she had lied to herself, consistently, for 6 weeks, and she recognized now, in the flat quiet of the bakery floor, that the lie she had told herself was the oldest one in the book. I am being practical. The lie that practical people tell themselves when they are being cowardly. The lie that dresses fear in the clothing of good judgment. She had been afraid. She had been afraid of being left with nothing, the way her mother had been left with nothing, the way the hunger of childhood finds its way into every adult choice if you do not name it and face it. She had been afraid, and instead of naming the fear to Marcus, instead of saying I am scared of what happens if this gets harder, she had quietly begun preparing for an exit. She was ashamed. Not the performative shame of a woman managing consequences. The real thing. The kind that sits in the chest and tells you the truth about your own choices. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She looked at it. This is Devin Walker, Marcus's assistant. He asked me to send you something. A photo appeared. It was a screenshot of a floor plan for the second floor of the Sandra Webb Community Business Center. The commercial kitchen space. In the center of the floor plan, someone had written in Marcus's handwriting. She recognized it from notes on grocery lists and texts, and one birthday card she still had in her dresser drawer. Sweet Brown Sugar Wholesale. Underneath the floor plan, Devin had written, he designed this space thinking about you 8 months ago. Before any of this. He wanted you to have that context. She set the phone down. She put her face in her hands. She sat on the bakery floor and was very quiet for a long time. Across town, Marcus Webb was also sitting on a floor. The floor of what had been the East Point studio apartment, cleared out now, his few things already moved back to the Buckhead penthouse. He was not sure why he was sitting on this floor rather than the penthouse's better floor. But it felt important, somehow, to be here. In the modest space that had been honest in a way the penthouse was not. In the place where a woman he loved had set up his kitchen and written him a note, and sat on his small balcony, and said, just be however you are. Keisha called at 8. He answered. How do you feel? She said. Like I did the right thing, he said. And like doing the right thing is one of the loneliest experiences a person can have. She was quiet. Then, give it time. I know. She is not a bad person, Marcus. I know that too. Are you going to give her another chance? He looked at the empty apartment. At the bare walls and the tiled floor and the window that looked out on a quiet East Point street. He thought about a 9-year-old girl holding his hand in the rain. He thought about everything he had built, and everything he had survived, and the thing that remained, after all of it, most stubbornly true, that he still wanted what he had wanted at the beginning. Not the show of love. The substance of it. I do not know, he said honestly. I need to find out who she is when she knows who I am. Because I have only seen who she was when she thought I had nothing. And who she was then, he paused, was both more beautiful than I expected and more complicated than I was prepared for. Keisha was quiet for a moment. That sounds like a beginning to me, she said. Not an ending. Maybe, he said. He stood up. He looked around the empty apartment one last time. He thought about leaving a note, the way she had left him one. He did not have a pen. He took out his phone and sent a text to Devin, "Donate the furniture to a shelter. All of it." Devin replied, "Already done?" Marcus smiled despite himself. Devin had known before he asked? Devin always knew. He walked out of the apartment, down the stairs, into the East Point night. His car was parked down the block, the Range Rover, not the Tahoe. He stood beside it for a moment, looking at the street. At the ordinary houses and the ordinary lights and the ordinary people living their ordinary lives with whatever complications they were managing, whatever versions of fear and love and bad choices and second chances they were navigating on their own. He was one of the wealthiest men in Atlanta. He had built empires from nothing. He had survived things that would have ended other people. And right now, standing on this ordinary East Point block on an ordinary Thursday night, he was just a man who had loved someone and lost something he had not yet decided whether he could get back. He got in the car. He drove home. She arrived at the Sandra Webb Community Business Center at 7:15 the next morning. Devin was there. Apparently he was always there, and he let her in without calling Marcus, which Brianna took to mean that Marcus had anticipated this and left instructions. The building was extraordinary on the inside. She had not had time to see it during the ribbon cutting, having been processing the particular earthquake of the preceding 15 minutes. But now, walking through it quietly in the pre-opening silence, she could see what Marcus had built and what it meant. The ground floor was designed as a flexible shared space, tables, equipment, and community meeting capacity. The walls were covered with photographs and artwork by local artists, all of them Black Atlanta, all of them telling stories of what the neighborhood had been and what it was becoming. There was a resource library, an office suite for small business consultations, a calendar on the wall with free workshops scheduled for the next 3 months. Financial literacy. Marketing for small businesses. Legal basics for entrepreneurs. The second floor was the commercial kitchen space and office suites. She found the room Devin had sent her the floor plan of. It was exactly as drawn. Large, professional, with equipment that she immediately recognized as being of a quality she could not have afforded for another 3 years. A kitchen that could triple her production capacity. A bakery kitchen built with care. She stood in the center of it for a long time. She had taken out her phone. She had started to dial Marcus. She had stopped. Because calling him on an impulse, saying the things she was feeling in a rush without having done the work of being honest with herself first, that would be exactly the kind of move that had gotten her here. Reacting from feeling rather than from truth. Acting to manage the situation rather than to actually change. She had put the phone away. She went back downstairs. She thanked Devin, who nodded and said nothing unnecessary, because Devin was a man who knew the weight of what was unsaid and respected it. She went back to Sweet Brown Sugar. She opened the bakery. She made everything she was scheduled to make that day, because the discipline of the work was itself a form of clarity. At noon, she took off her apron. She sat in her office, a small back room that also served as storage, barely enough space for a desk and a chair and a filing cabinet covered with photos of people she loved, and she wrote. She wrote it by hand in a notebook because typing felt too fast for what she needed to say and too easy to delete. She wrote it as honestly as she had ever written anything, which meant she wrote things that made her uncomfortable, which meant she was doing it right. She wrote about her father leaving when she was 7. She wrote about the specific hunger she carried. She wrote about Chanel and her mother, and the way their voices had become a chorus in her head during the hardest weeks of Marcus's test. She wrote about Darius Langston and why she had let herself be available to him, and she was honest about the why. Not it was business, but he made me feel secure, and I was afraid. She wrote about Club Onyx and the gold dress and what it had felt like to dance with a man who had money when the man she loved appeared to have lost his. And she wrote with the unsparing honesty of a woman who was no longer willing to be kind to her own bad choices at the expense of truth. She wrote about Marcus. About who he was. About what she had actually seen over 4 months of real, close, genuine proximity. She wrote about the note in the cabinet. You built something once. You will build it again, and she was honest about what that note revealed about who she was when she was most fully herself. She wrote, I was the woman who wrote that note. I was also the woman who showed up in the gold dress. Both of those women are me. I have to decide which one I am going to be. She wrote until her hand cramped. Then she read it back. It was not comfortable reading. But it was true. And she had learned, in the last 24 hours, the enormous cost of choosing comfort over truth. She folded the pages and put them in her purse. She was not going to send them to Marcus. They were not for him. They were for her. A record of the conversation she needed to have with herself before she had any right to have it with him. She picked up her phone. She dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the 3rd ring. He said nothing. He waited. She said, I want to have a real conversation. Not to fix things or ask for anything. Just to be honest. Will you give me that? A silence. Then yes. When? Whenever you are ready, she said. I will wait. Another silence. She heard him breathe. She heard the particular quality of the silence of a man who is deciding how much he trusts what he has just been offered. Saturday, he said. Noon. The bakery. I will be here, she said. She hung up. She sat in the small back office with the photos on the filing cabinet, and let herself be still for the first time in weeks. The fear was still there, the hunger, the uncertainty, the ghost of every choice she wished she had made differently. But underneath it, something else was there too. Something steady. The same thing that had made her open a bakery on Auburn Avenue with $11,000 and a prayer. She was still here. She had not run. She had come back. That was the beginning of something. She did not yet know what. He arrived at noon exactly. Of course he did. Marcus Webb was a man who kept his word with a precision that was itself a form of integrity. She had the bakery closed for the lunch hour, the closed sign on the door, a small table set in the corner with 2 coffees and a peach pound cake she had made fresh that morning. He came in and looked at the pound cake, and the corner of his mouth did the not quite smile thing. The first 10 minutes were careful. Not cold, they had been through too much together for cold, but careful. The kind of careful where 2 people who respect each other are finding their footing after the ground shifted. She asked him about the community center. He told her about the Sandra Webb Center's mission with the same quiet passion she had always heard in him when he spoke about work that mattered, and she listened the way she had always listened to him, with real attention, because that was who she was with this man, even when she had failed to be that person consistently. Then she said, "Can I tell you something I wrote?" She read from the notebook. Not all of it, not the most private pieces. But enough. The truth about the fear. The truth about Chanel and her mother. The truth about Darius Langston. The truth about Club Onyx. The truth about what she had been choosing and why, and the difference between the woman she had been in those moments and the woman she wanted to be. He listened without interrupting. He looked at her directly the entire time. Not with judgment. Judgment was not something Marcus Webb wore on his face. He looked at her with the same full, present attention she had fallen in love with, the kind that made you feel seen rather than exposed. When she was done, she folded the paper and put it on the table. "I am not saying that because I want you to forgive me immediately or because I think it fixes what happened," she said. "I am saying it because you deserve honest, and you have been honest with me eventually, and I owe you the same." He was quiet for a long time. He looked at the peach pound cake. He looked at his coffee. He looked at the window, at Auburn Avenue outside, at the ordinary Thursday rhythm of a street that held both their histories. Then he said, "I put you through something unfair. I want to be honest about that too. I designed a situation that isolated you and pressured you and introduced a specific temptation and then evaluated you on the outcome. That is not love. That is a test. And love is not supposed to be a test." She looked at him. "The reason I did it," he said slowly, "is not an excuse. It is a reason. My mother left when I was 11. Every person I have relied on since has found a way to demonstrate that reliability has a cost threshold. I built my whole life trying to ensure I was never again in a position where someone else's choice could destroy me." He was quiet. "And somewhere in that building, I forgot that protection is not the same as trust. And you cannot love without trust." She nodded. She understood. She understood it in the way that you understand something when it names a thing you have felt yourself but not articulated. "I want to start over," she said. "Not pretend this did not happen. Not go back to before. Start over with the truth on the table. You know who you are. I know who I am. We know the worst of each other now. Can we start from here?" He looked at her. The calm, watchful eyes. The man who had carried a 40-pound commercial mixer 2 blocks without being asked. Who had fixed a hinge. Who had built a community center on Auburn Avenue and set aside a kitchen with her name on it before he ever had a reason to. He picked up the peach pound cake. He took a fork. He cut a piece. He tasted it. The silence stretched. "You are right," he said finally. "It is everything." She smiled. The real smile. The one that changed her face. He slid the plate toward the center of the table. He picked up his coffee. He looked at her. "Start from here," he said. "But we do this right. All of it honest. All of it real." "All of it real," she agreed. Outside, Auburn Avenue continued its ordinary business. Buses. Pedestrians. The city going about its life. And in the corner of Sweet Brown Sugar Bakery, 2 people who had found and lost and found each other again sat with a slice of peach pound cake between them and the very particular, fragile, extraordinary possibility of a second beginning. The Sandra Webb Community Business Center had been open for 6 months when the Atlanta Business Chronicle ran a feature on it with a photograph that would become one of the most shared images in the Atlanta business community that year. In the photograph, Marcus Webb stood in the doorway of the building, his hand resting on the frame, the afternoon light catching the sign above him. He was not looking at the camera. He was looking at something to the left of the frame. His expression was the most open that anyone who knew him professionally had ever seen on his face, not the controlled, strategic composure of a boardroom. Something warmer. Something that looked like belonging. What was to the left of the frame? Brianna Cole, in her red apron, carrying a catering tray toward the building's event space. She was laughing at something, her head thrown back, her braids swinging, a woman fully occupying her life. The feature in the Chronicle was about the center's economic impact. 14 small businesses housed, 11 of them black-owned. 32 workshops held in 6 months, total attendance 460. 3 businesses that had moved from micro-operations to formal LLCs with the center's support. Sweet Brown Sugar Wholesale, operating from the second-floor commercial kitchen, had its first major hotel contract, the same downtown hotel where Brianna had worked as a pastry assistant years before. The contract was worth 4 times what her bakery's entire first year had generated. Destiny, Brianna's assistant, had been hired full-time for the wholesale division. 2 additional bakers had been brought on. The line at Sweet Brown Sugar's storefront had not gotten shorter. Chanel had apologized. Properly, not quickly. She had called Brianna one morning and said, "I was so focused on protecting you from financial instability that I pushed you toward a man who offered the appearance of stability over a man who offered the real thing. That was my fear, not your wisdom, and I let it contaminate your decision. I am sorry." Brianna had received the apology the way it was offered, genuinely, with recognition of what it cost, and without performance. They were still best friends. Some things are strong enough to hold truth. Denise Cole had driven to the Sandra Webb Community Business Center opening 3 months in, on a Sunday afternoon when Marcus and Brianna had invited her. She had walked through the building in silence. She had read the name above the door. She had looked at the photo of the young Marcus and his sister on the wall near the entrance, one of 2 personal photographs he had allowed to be displayed. And she had found Marcus near the window of the event space and said simply, "I underestimated you. I am sorry for the advice I gave my daughter." Marcus had looked at this small, steel-spined woman who reminded him in certain ways of Keisha, who reminded him in deeper ways of the mother he had not had. He had said, "You were protecting her? I understand that better than you know." Devin had taken a vacation. His first in 3 years. Marcus had made him. And Marcus and Brianna, they had taken it slow. They had done it the right way, the way he had said in the bakery that Saturday noon, all of it honest, all of it real. She knew his history now, fully. He knew hers. They had argued once, a real argument in month 2, about communication, about the specific ways that fears showed up in both of them and collided. The argument had been uncomfortable. They had both said harder truths than were comfortable. They had resolved it not by retreating but by sitting with the discomfort until it had transformed into understanding. He had not proposed again yet. The ring was still in his desk at the Webb Equity Group office. Devin knew where it was. Keisha knew where it was. Marcus knew it would find its moment when the moment was real rather than staged. He was in no hurry. For the first time in a long time, he was not building towards something. He was simply in it. Simply present. Simply here. On a Tuesday morning in September, Marcus Webb sat at the corner table in Sweet Brown Sugar Bakery with a book and a black coffee, the same way he had sat at that table every Tuesday for months, except now the book was one Brianna had recommended and the coffee had been brought to him by Brianna herself, who leaned down as she set it down and said quietly, so only he could hear, "You good? Not your money. Not your business. You." He looked up at her. The woman who had given the last pastries to the woman and child with nothing. The woman who had written a note on the inside of a cabinet. The woman who had made bad choices and faced them without hiding. The woman who was standing in her bakery on Auburn Avenue on a Tuesday morning in September, in her red apron, asking him with complete sincerity how he was doing. "I am good," he said. And for the first time in a very long time, the words were entirely, completely, undeniably true. She smiled and went back to work. He opened his book. Outside, Auburn Avenue was doing what it had always done, carrying its history forward into something new. The Sandra Webb Community Business Center stood 3 blocks down, its doors open. Down the street, the city's ordinary Tuesday was in full motion. People building. People struggling. People starting over. People trying. Marcus Webb turned a page. The coffee was perfect. The light was good. The morning was real. And sometimes, that is everything. This story is for everyone who has ever been afraid that love and stability could not exist in the same room. For everyone who has ever confused what looks valuable with what is truly worth keeping. For everyone who has confused protecting yourself with closing yourself off. And for everyone who has ever made a mistake and wondered if they were past the point of being honest about it. You are not. That is the truth this story carries. Marcus Webb built $437 million from nothing. But the thing that cost him the most to build was the capacity to trust again. The thing that made him richest was not the real estate. It was the willingness, despite everything, to sit in a corner table in a bakery on Auburn Avenue and let himself be seen. And Brianna Cole, who was never a villain, who was always a person doing the complicated and perfect work of being human, chose the harder and more honest path when she could have chosen the easier one. That choice does not erase what happened. But it is the foundation of everything that came after. What would you have done? If you were in Marcus's position, would you have run the test? If you were Brianna, at your most afraid, with your most practical concerns pressing down on you, what choice would you have made? We are asking, because the comment section is where the real conversations happen. Tell us. We are listening. And if this story moved you, if it made you think or made you feel or made you want to call someone and tell them you see them, then you are exactly who Story Cave is for. Hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like this one are not entertainment. They are mirrors. And sometimes the most important thing a person can see is a clear reflection of who they are choosing to be. This is Story Cave, where every story is someone's truth. And every truth deserves to be told. Subscribe. Stay close. The next story is already waiting.